Hello. I met this friend who one day decided to call it quits from corporate life after I think about 3 decades of being an executive and then a manager. So I asked him, what's so good about being in corporate for so long? He said, nearly nothing. But I think the better days were when I was a manager. So I said, what's so good about being a manager? He said, people don't realize that as long as you understand the limitations of being a manager, you can really enjoy. So I said, can you define a manager for me? And this is what he said, and I thought it was very interesting, his description of a manager. He said, Ramesh, you've seen these old Hindi movies where there is a zamindar who's usually a villain, and he's got a munimji who's usually an old guy looking after his books, his ledgers. He says a manager is somewhat like that munimji. He can touch, feel, smell the money of the zamindar, but he is accountable for them every minute of the day when asked for the accounts. A manager is a person who has to hand back to the company the resources that were given to him by the company in a shape better than the shape in which he received it. There's really no other work a manager does. He is a keeper of organizational resources. Munimjis are permitted to feel important and bigger than they really are. This comes from their proximity to the centers of power. For the Munimji, it's his proximity to the Zamindar. In Jaisalmer in Rajasthan, one of the tourist attractions among the many Havelis that they take you around is the Patwa Haveli. This is a well-preserved residence cum office of a Rajasthani businessman who lived in these Havelis 200 to 300 years ago. As you go around all the rooms in the Haveli, you're shown the Munimji's room. The sign outside describes the role of the Munimji as interlocutor, mediator, and spokesperson on behalf of his boss, the businessman. Interlocutor, mediator, and spokesperson. Interesting choice of words. The signage also mentions that the Munimji was expected to be discreet and virtuous. The Munimji is thrilled when the Zamindar calls him, listens to his advice and instructions, and sometimes actually follows him. The Munimji is very happy with the influence he seems to have over the Zamindar. Managers in corporations generally suffer from similar delusions. They're all puffed up about being higher in the hierarchy and even tend to share information with their own team members on a need-to-know basis. If their suggestions are accepted by people higher in the hierarchy, they start believing in their own indispensability. Managers are racked by these two emotional highs, the importance of being higher in the hierarchy and the importance of being able to make others do what they want them to do. There is, as a result, a huge amount of confusion between these two ways in which a manager manifests his power, authority and influence. Very sadly, a lot of managers are drunk on the authority that the position of being a manager brings. Authority is raw power. Influence is soft power. Between authority and influence, influence wins every single time. It always scores over authority. It's very rare that you find leaders who have both authority and influence. Very rare. Maybe less than 1% of managers we have in most companies. But the sad thing is, there are a whole lot of managers who have authority but no influence.
Now, what do we mean by influence? Influence is soft power. Influence is something that happens even after the person has left your presence. You have made a mark on him and he is thinking along the lines that you have asked him to go and perform a task. We always say it's very, very easy to make a person think his way through a new task and then do it, rather than for a person to blindly do his way through a new task. When you use authority, you're saying, I don't care what you think on how this should be done, but this is how I want it done. But when you use influence, you're telling him, think through this. And I think it's good for you for the following reasons. And you'll really see benefits when you do it this way. Do you agree with me? Why? Why not? Now, there's a huge amount of goodwill that you may have already earned from your team member as a manager. Now you want to use this goodwill, all earned from the earlier transactions, and when you ask him to trust you, When you ask him to do things your way, he will do it. Past examples of using influence beget more opportunities to use more influence, and repeated use of influence builds trust. Therefore, influence without authority scores any day over authority without influence. It's also a sad fact that over 2/3 of managers in our corporations have neither influence nor authority. They are just there to fill that box in the hierarchy. We call them NINA, NINA, no influence, no authority. Well, it is cruel, but there is a study in the UK which says the percentage of NINAs is 78% among corporate managers. So it's somewhere between 60 and 80% of our managers who just filling in the position there. As a leader, you need to use influence. The word influence, interestingly, is born from the virus influenza. Therefore, it shares the same three properties as the virus. 1. The influenza virus needs to find somebody vulnerable, which is why at home the kids get the flu first and then the adults catch it. 2. The virus needs to find a place to root itself and grow to a certain strength. 3. It needs to spread. No virus is worth its name if it cannot spread. Now the same three rules apply to influence. 1. You need to find somebody, and at the right time and the right person when you choose to influence. Influence cannot work 24/7. People at some time are impervious to any kind of advice that you are trying to give in order to influence them. You have to sense their readiness to take influence. That's the vulnerability we talked about earlier. Vulnerability could come in many forms. It could be, for example, the person being unsure about how to do something, or could be the person's lack of confidence, or could be doubts on how it will all turn out. Fear, or even a keenness on the part of the person to prove oneself. You have to know when they are ready to take that piece of advice that you're dishing out. When vulnerable, they are more ready to listen. 2. Once you have done the influence, leave it alone to spread its own roots and take its place in the mind of the receiver. 3. That person who has been influenced by you should be able to influence a second, third, fourth person in the team. Only then are you truly influential. Using influence is an art. It's not genetically endowed in a person. Nobody is born influential or otherwise. All of us can influence. In fact, all of us have influenced right through our lives. But when you get to do it consciously, you become more of a leader than a mere manager.
Power is the raw material for influence. You need an alchemy to convert power to influence. Which is why Condoleezza Rice, the ex-Secretary of State in the US government, says, "Power is nothing unless you can turn it into influence."